I killed my first crow when I was 9 years old. Some might think it was an accident, but it wasn't. I watched it closely for about a week. It would fly into our yard at about the same time every morning. I knew it was the same crow because it had a white spot around its eye, like a birthmark. It would hop along the ground, peck at the ground for a bit, and then fly away. I don't know why it stuck to this schedule. We didn't leave any food out for it. One day, for some reason, I decided to pick up a rock and throw it at it. I missed, only scaring the bird. I didn't expect to see it again, but as luck would have it, the next morning when I looked out the kitchen window, there it was again, right on schedule. I ran out, got another rock, threw it at it, and it flew away again, only to return the next day, and this hunt continued for the rest of the summer. Looking back, I think I understand why I wanted to hurt her so much. I was jealous. Unlike her, I couldn't just up and fly away whenever I wanted. I was here, chained to the ground, chained to this house that was like hell to me. It seemed like the crow knew this and returned every day to annoy me. Eventually, the stone hit its mark. I was as surprised as the bird when I finally managed to hit it as it was taking off, knocking it to the ground. Once on the ground, it continued to thrash and flap its wings, but no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't fly again. One of its wings seemed to be broken. After a while, the bird resigned itself and simply sat on the sun-scorched grass, its chest rising and falling, its head spinning from side to side. I grabbed the largest garden ornament scattered around the backyard, lifted it with both hands, and walked slowly toward my wounded prey. The crow stayed where it was. It had clearly seen me coming, but for some reason, it made no attempt to run away. I moved towards the rock. I lifted the heavy ceramic gnome to head level and, using all the strength my skinny arms could muster, brought it down with all its weight on the helpless creature. And then again and again. There was so much blood. I could feel it growing warm on my hands and face as it splattered after each blow. It wasn't until I'd finished turning the crow into a glistening mass of broken bones and feathers that I realized it hadn't made me feel any better. I was still angry, still sad, only now there was guilt mixed in. Suddenly, I heard my mother calling me from the house, and my whole body froze. She yelled at me to go upstairs and pack my things, as my father would be coming for me very soon. I didn't even look back, just hesitantly replied, "Oh, okay." Guilt turned to panic. Thinking back, I realized that I could have simply returned the gnome to its place, maybe wiped away the blood, and no one would have noticed. Mom rarely went out into the yard anymore, and if she did, she would most likely assume that a stray cat was to blame for the mess. But in my 9-year-old brain, that wasn't enough. More and more desperate scenarios played out in my head. If Mom found out, she would tell Dad, and what if he stopped coming? What if the neighbors' kids saw this and told everyone at school? They would think I was even weirder than I actually was. The lump in my throat grew. My gaze fell again on the bird, or what was left of it. Conflicting emotions squirmed like worms in my stomach, and then an unimaginable thought occurred to me. I could eat it. The impulse was primal, almost instinctual, stemming from the same envy that had driven me to this horrible act in the first place. But in a twisted way, it made sense. I mean, no one ever minded when Grandpa took me fishing. Even if we caught and killed fish, it was okay because we ate them. Right, killing wasn't so bad when it was for food. Animals did it all the time, and we didn't judge them for it. I reached out, my fingers shaking, and turned the lifeless body over to see its sleek, jet-black feathers glued together with blood. And it smelled almost metallic when I picked it up from the ground. I held my breath and sank my teeth into the still warm flesh. Its sinewy texture resisted my teeth as blood gushed into my mouth. The taste was strange, astringent, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just unusual. Strands of sinewy tissue clung to the carcass until I chewed them one by one. I exhaled slowly as I controlled my rage over remembering the emotion it created, and smelled as if it returned. Strands of sinewy tissue clung to the carcass until I chewed them one by one. The first bite was hard to swallow. It slid down my throat like a thick, slow rope. There was nothing to do but continue. I tore off another piece, the tendons stretching in protest as I yanked them out. Each bite echoed in my ears, a painful squelching sound against the background of insects and rustling leaves, as if nature itself was holding its breath in disbelief. And then I heard, "Henry, what the hell are you doing?" I dropped my catch and turned to see my parents standing at the edge of the yard. Their faces were full of shock and disgust as I stared at them with a mouthful of raw meat and feathers. Hot blood was running down my chin. "I never heard it before, but it sounds like the right way to do things." That's how it all started. I ate my next crow when I was 16. I saw it in the park and knew right away it was her. Her feathers were a rich jet black, and her beak was an unusual shape, slightly curved inward at the end. Whether it was due to an old injury or just the way it grew, I'm not an ornithologist, so I can't say for sure. All I knew was that my mouth was watering at the sight of this bird. Her face lined up with mine and listening to her speech. All I knew was that my mouth was watering at the sight of this bird. This time my hunting method was a little more sophisticated. I lured the bird to the ground with food, and while it was busy eating, I attacked it using the edge of my tennis racket. It took several blows to completely immobilize her, and then I quickly ended her suffering by crushing her head with my foot. I didn't want her to suffer. There was no point. I'm not some sick sadist. I just needed her dead. If there had been a more painless, more efficient way to do it, I would have chosen it. I looked around, making sure there were no witnesses, and knelt down next to the lifeless bird. The smell was unpleasant, but also intoxicating. Blood and earth. Every breath ignited something in me. I don't know what it was, but it felt right. I stood. As I sank my teeth into the sinewy, warm flesh, the familiar metallic taste spread across my tongue. The initial resistance of the tendons weakened, and my incisors cut through muscle that stretched and snapped like a tight rubber band. I bit harder. My teeth started to ache when they hit the bone. I tried to bite the head off, but it was too hard and too messy, so I settled for chewing the soft middle part. Probably the worst part of the whole experience was the bits of intestine that kept getting stuck between my molars. Flashes of green seemed to leap from my mouth as I flailed around, trying to flatten the skull. When I was done, I buried what was left and went home like nothing had happened. Indulging my weird cravings became a lot easier when I reached the age where I could legally buy a firearm. Honestly, I don't know how I haven't gotten sick yet. I've tried cooking meat, but it just wasn't the same. I know what I'm doing can't be healthy, but then again, everyone has their weaknesses. Some smoke, some drink to numb the pain of everyday life. I just like to snack on raw crow every now and then. As far as self-destructive habits go, I'd say mine are pretty tolerable. Other than that, my life has been pretty normal until recently. I graduated from high school, went to college, got a job, got married, took out a mortgage. My wife and I even discussed trying to have a baby when we were a little more financially stable. My beloved Olivia, of course, knew nothing of my strange habits. I've been thinking about telling her for the last few weeks, but I guess it's too late now. Yesterday, my boss let us leave work early. Most of my coworkers went out for drinks, but I really wanted to get home and surprise my wife. Maybe take her for a drive around town like we used to do. But when I pulled up to the house, I immediately sensed something was wrong. All the lights in the house were off. The front door was open, swinging in the cold December wind. Looking closer, I noticed that the lock was broken. My heart pounding, I ran inside. The darkness greeted me indifferently. I called my wife's name. The echo of her name hung in the still air, but there was only silence in response. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of life, any movement. And then I heard it, a monstrous cacophony of croaks and wet sounds. It led me deeper into the bowels of the house, to where the light from the broken window spilled onto the floor. The horrific scene that met my eyes shattered my entire world. There, sprawled across the floor of the room, amid twisted metal and shards of glass, lay Olivia. Her head was thrown back at an unnatural angle, her lifeless eyes wide and glassy, as if they were staring straight at me. Hovering over her body was something I find hard to describe even now. Bald and pink, skin like a baby's, but stretched taut over a body that was at once human and somehow wrong. She had a torso and shoulders and legs, but they seemed only partially formed, like an enormous, premature fetus. It had short, featherless wings instead of arms, and its skull was shaped like a crow's head, though it was disproportionately large for its skinny frame. I just stood there, helplessly watching as it pecked at Olivia's mangled remains. Part of me wanted to rush at the thing, grab the nearest chair and beat it to death, but at the same time I couldn't completely hate it for what it had done. It's okay if you eat it afterwards, right? Circle of life and all that. I may be a pervert, maybe not exactly sane, but I sure as hell wouldn't add hypocrisy to the mix. Sitting in the next room, poking around in my wife's body, I'm waiting for it to finish. I have my newly purchased pistol in my hands and a large knife at the ready. I'll tell you what it tastes like later.